Hello, and welcome to Readings in English. Whether you're just starting out or looking to improve your English, this channel is here to help you enjoy learning the language through the power of storytelling. The English language is one of the most widely spoken languages in the world. It's a bridge that connects people from all cultures, backgrounds, and walks of life. Learning English opens up opportunities to explore new ideas, connect with others, and immerse yourself in stories that inspire and entertain. Here on this channel, I'll be sharing stories that not only help you practice English, but also transport you to different worlds, each filled with lessons and emotions to enjoy. Today's story is one that truly embodies the journey of learning English. It's called A Silent Summer. This story follows Luca, a young boy from Italy, as he spends a summer in the United States and faces the challenges of a new language and culture. Through friendship, determination, and moments of both struggle and triumph, Luca discovers that learning a language is much more than just words. It's about connecting with people, finding confidence, and embracing the world around you. So sit back, relax, and let's journey with Luca in A Silent Summer here on Readings in English. Luca squinted as he stepped off the plane, the unfamiliar light of the American sun sharper and hotter than he expected. The airport buzzed with people, their voices blending into a stream of English phrases that he barely understood. A mix of excitement and nervousness fluttered in his stomach as he looked around, feeling small amidst the crowd. His aunt and uncle were waiting for him at the gate, waving with wide smiles. "Luca," Aunt Maria called out, her familiar voice cutting through the noise. Luca waved back, grateful for a familiar face. He hurried over, gripping his small suitcase tightly. The ride from the airport to their suburban home felt surreal. Rows of houses, each with neat lawns and sprawling backyards, passed by the car window. Luca watched in awe, taking in the sights of this new place that was so different from his town back in Italy. He could hardly believe he would be spending an entire summer here with people who spoke a language he could barely grasp. They arrived at his relative's house, a cozy two-story home with a backyard full of flowers and a tire swing. Luca felt both curious and intimidated. The house was beautiful, but everything seemed larger, louder, and somehow sharper than the familiar streets back home. Inside, his younger cousin Ben was waiting. "Hi, Luca," he said with a bright smile, holding up a baseball glove. Luca didn't understand everything he said, but caught the enthusiastic play at the end. Ben gestured toward the backyard, and Luca understood. Baseball. Luca felt his stomach tighten. He knew little English and even less about American sports, but he nodded, forcing a smile. Ben ran ahead, eager to show him how to play. Luca followed, a mixture of excitement and nervousness clashing within him. As he tried to follow Ben's instructions, he quickly realized how difficult it was to communicate without shared words. Ben spoke in a rapid mix of English phrases that Luca struggled to follow, but his cousin's enthusiasm was infectious. Though he didn't fully understand, Luca tried to mimic Ben's movements, awkwardly gripping the bat and giving his best attempt at hitting the ball. By the end of the day, Luca was tired but happy. His English might be weak, but he felt the warmth of his family's welcome. That night he lay in bed, thinking about how different everything was and wondering if he would manage to make friends. His excitement for this summer was mingled with the fear of being misunderstood, yet he felt a spark of determination to find his way in this new world. The next morning, Luca awoke to the sounds of birds chirping outside his window. He stretched and felt a rush of anticipation. Today, he would explore the neighborhood, maybe even meet some kids his age. After breakfast, Aunt Maria handed him a map of the area, though he quickly realized he would need more than a map to truly understand his surroundings. With a deep breath, Luca stepped out onto the front porch. He walked down the street, his eyes wide with curiosity. The neighborhood was lively. People were mowing lawns, walking dogs, and kids were riding bikes and playing in the distance. He felt a strange mix of being part of something yet feeling like an outsider at the same time. As he wandered toward a nearby park, he noticed a group of boys playing a game he recognized from television baseball. He stood at a distance, watching them as they laughed and shouted instructions to one another. Luca wanted to join them, but a knot of uncertainty held him back. He felt his heart race, a part of him longing to be part of the group yet fearing the embarrassment of not knowing the language or the game. One of the boys, who looked about his age, caught sight of him. With a quick wave, he gestured for Luca to come over. Luca hesitated, looking around, wondering if he was the one being called. But the boy waved again, motioning more enthusiastically this time. Taking a deep breath, Luca walked over to the group, his stomach doing flips. "Hey," the boy said, extending his hand. "I'm Jack." Luca took his hand, nodding and attempting a small smile. "Luca," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He hoped Jack wouldn't notice how nervous he was. The other boys gathered around, and Jack explained that they were a player short for their game. Luca caught only fragments of the conversation, but understood enough to nod. Jack handed him a glove and pointed to a position on the field. Luca felt his cheeks flush as he tried to follow along, feeling clumsy and out of place. The game began, and Luca found himself in the middle of a whirlwind of English phrases and unfamiliar gestures. Jack occasionally looked over and gave him a thumbs up, encouraging him. Luca did his best to copy the other players, fumbling a few times, but giving it his all. As the game went on, the boys' initial curiosity gave way to laughter and playful teasing. Luca didn't understand all their jokes, but he caught the smiles and the camaraderie. By the end of the game, he felt a strange sense of accomplishment. He might not speak the language or fully understand the game, but he had joined in, even if only for a little while. When they wrapped up, Jack walked over and gave him a friendly pat on the back. "You did good, Luca. Join us again tomorrow." Luca nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. He hadn't expected kindness from strangers, especially when he felt like an outsider. As he walked back to his aunt and uncle's house, he felt the first hint of hope, a small but bright spark that maybe, just maybe, this summer would be more than just a silent struggle. The following morning, Luca woke up with a renewed sense of excitement. He was still adjusting to his surroundings, but yesterday's game had filled him with a new kind of hope. He'd barely understood anything the other kids said, yet they had welcomed him. He had even felt a flicker of friendship in Jack's smile. With his aunt's encouragement, he dressed quickly and set off to the park, hopeful to see the boys again. When he arrived, Jack was already there, tossing a ball into his glove while waiting for the others. His face lit up when he saw Luca. "Hey, Luca," he called out, waving. Luca returned the wave, his shyness fading a little. Jack's welcoming grin made him feel less self-conscious. Jack seemed to understand that Luca's English was limited and slowed his speech slightly, using gestures as he talked. Even with these efforts, Luca struggled to catch every word, but he appreciated Jack's kindness. As more boys gathered, Jack took it upon himself to teach Luca some basic baseball terms. He pointed to the bat, saying bat, and then to the glove, repeating glove. Luca repeated each word carefully, his accent heavy, but his determination clear. The other boys chuckled, but it wasn't mocking. They seemed amused and intrigued by his effort to learn. Throughout the game, Luca did his best to remember Jack's instructions. He focused hard, watching Jack and mimicking his movements. Whenever he got something right, Jack gave him a thumbs up, reinforcing that silent yet growing bond. Their connection was simple yet powerful, built on gestures and shared experiences rather than words. Luca felt a warm sense of belonging that surprised him. As the sun began to set, Jack and Luca sat on the park bench, catching their breath. Jack spoke to him in broken Italian, piecing together words he'd learned from his own family members. Though the phrases were clumsy and often incorrect, Luca appreciated the effort. It made him feel value in a way words couldn't express. They shared a laugh as Jack attempted a few phrases, struggling with pronunciation. As Luca returned home at evening, his heart was lighter. Jack's openness and attempts to bridge the language gap touched him deeply. He knew he had a long way to go to understand English fluently, but today had shown him that friendships didn't need perfect words. He felt the strength of his new, silent bond with Jack and realized he wanted to learn more to express his gratitude. The next day, Luca woke up determined to make progress with English. After breakfast, he asked Aunt Maria if she could help him practice a few phrases. She seemed delighted by his request and spent the morning going over simple words and phrases that might be useful with his friends. They sat together in the living room, with Aunt Maria patiently pronouncing each word for him. Luca repeated after her, concentrating on each syllable, his brow furrowed with determination. He wanted to do more than just imitate his friends. He wanted to truly understand and join their conversations. Aunt Maria encouraged him, reminding him that learning a new language took time and patience. Later that afternoon, Luca returned to the park. His excitement was tinged with nervousness as he repeated the phrases in his head. He felt a wave of doubt as he wondered if he'd remember everything or if he'd end up making a fool of himself. However, Jack was there waiting, and his friendly smile eased Luca's nerves. Jack noticed Luca's efforts immediately. As they started another game, Luca used a few of the words he'd practiced, and Jack's face lit up with encouragement. "You're getting it," he said, giving Luca a playful nudge. The other boys seemed impressed, and Luca felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. Every time he used a new word, his confidence grew, and he felt a little more like he belonged. But it wasn't all easy. When one of the boys asked him a question, Luca froze. He hadn't learned enough to understand and felt his cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. The others waited, and the awkward silence seemed to stretch. Sensing his discomfort, Jack quickly stepped in, changing the subject with a few words. Luca felt grateful, but the frustration lingered. He wanted so badly to communicate, but kept feeling trapped by his limited knowledge. Despite the struggles, Luca refused to give up. That evening, he sat in his room, studying a small notebook where he'd written down words and phrases from Aunt Maria. He practiced under his breath, determined to master them. He thought about how patient Jack had been and how his friend's encouragement had eased his fears. He wanted to surprise him by learning even more. Over the following days, Luca dedicated himself to improving his English. Each morning, he would go over the phrases with Aunt Maria, and each afternoon he would head to the park, testing what he'd learned with Jack. The process was slow and often frustrating, but he noticed small improvements. He was beginning to understand parts of conversations, and his responses, though simple, started to come more naturally. One evening, Aunt Maria caught him practicing in front of the mirror, his face serious with concentration. She watched him for a moment before giving him a reassuring hug. "Luca, you're doing wonderfully. Don't be so hard on yourself," she said. Her words comforted him, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose. By the end of the week, Luca felt a subtle but real shift. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but he felt closer to his friends and more confident each day. His determination to bridge the language gap was stronger than ever, and he looked forward to every game at the park, feeling a step closer to truly belonging. Luca felt his confidence slowly building as he practiced his English, encouraged by Jack and the other boys. Each day he would try a new phrase or word, and each small success made him feel more at ease. However, his progress wasn't without setbacks. One afternoon, during a game at the park, Luca's limited understanding of English led to an embarrassing misunderstanding. It began with a simple instruction. Jack had called out to Luca, telling him to cover second base. The words sounded familiar, but Luca hesitated, unsure of their exact meaning. He glanced around, trying to figure it out, but his confusion was evident. Jack repeated the phrase, this time slower, as the other boys waited. Luca felt his cheeks flush, and in his nervousness, he ran toward third base instead. Laughter erupted as the boys realized what had happened. Luca stopped, feeling his face turn red. He wanted to laugh with them, but the embarrassment made it hard. His heart sank as he saw some of the boys shaking their heads in amusement. He feared they thought of him as a burden, someone who didn't understand even the simplest instructions. For the first time, his determination wavered, and he wondered if he was truly welcome. Sensing his discomfort, Jack came over, giving him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "No big deal, Luca," he said, his tone reassuring. "It happens," but Luca couldn't shake the sting of embarrassment. He nodded, trying to smile, but inside he felt discouraged. Maybe he would never fully understand. Maybe he would always be the boy who didn't quite fit in. As the game wrapped up, Luca walked home, replaying the incident in his mind. He thought about his mistakes, feeling a mix of frustration and self-doubt. The laughter had been innocent, but it still hurt, a reminder of how far he had yet to go. He wondered if the boys would eventually grow tired of his missteps, of having to explain things to him over and over. That evening, Luca sat in his room, staring at his notebook of English phrases. He felt an urge to give up, to close the notebook and accept that he might never truly fit in. But then he remembered Jack's reassuring smile and how he had defended him without hesitation. The memory brought a hint of warmth to his heart, reminding him that not every mistake had to be a failure. With a deep breath, Luca picked up his notebook and resumed studying. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but he wasn't ready to let one misunderstanding stop him. He would try harder, even if it meant facing more moments like today's. He would keep learning for himself, for Jack, and for the chance to truly belong. The next day, Luca arrived at the park feeling a mix of apprehension and determination. He had spent the previous night studying his phrases, going over each word until he could say them without hesitation. As he approached the group, he wondered if they remembered the incident from the day before. He hoped he wouldn't make another mistake. To his relief, Jack greeted him with his usual smile, making no mention of the previous day. "Ready to play?" he asked, holding up a baseball glove. Luca nodded, grateful for the fresh start. As the game began, Luca focused on the phrases he had practiced. He remembered the words for different bases and repeated them in his mind, determined not to mix them up again. When Jack called for him to cover second base, Luca moved confidently, positioning himself just as he had practiced. His friends cheered, and a wave of pride washed over him. It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory. Throughout the game, Luca found himself using more of his English. He shouted simple phrases like "I got it" and "good job" to his teammates, each word feeling like a step closer to truly being part of the group. He noticed that the boys responded positively, giving him encouraging nods and even including him more in their conversations. By the end of the game, Luca felt a new sense of belonging. He might not understand everything, but he was no longer an outsider. Jack came over, giving him a high five. "You're really getting it, Luca," he said, his tone filled with genuine pride. Luca smiled, feeling his confidence grow. As they left the park, Jack began explaining some of the baseball terms Luca had struggled with. He used simple words and gestures, making sure Luca understood each concept. Luca listened intently, grateful for Jack's patience and kindness. For the first time, he felt that he wasn't just a spectator, but a true participant in their games. That evening, Luca couldn't contain his excitement as he shared his small victories with Aunt Maria. He described the phrases he had used and the cheers of his friends. Aunt Maria listened, her face beaming with pride. She hugged him tightly, telling him how proud she was of his progress. Before bed, Luca sat by his window, looking out at the quiet street. The doubt and embarrassment from the day before felt like a distant memory. Today had shown him that even small steps could lead to meaningful progress. He had faced his fear of making mistakes and found that his friends were still there cheering him on. With a renewed sense of purpose, Luca promised himself he would keep going. This summer was becoming more than just a challenge. It was a journey of discovery, of finding his place in a world that was both unfamiliar and full of potential. He closed his eyes, feeling a growing confidence that tomorrow held even more small victories. As the days passed, Luca's confidence in his English grew steadily, and he began to feel more comfortable around his new friends. However, he was quickly reminded of the cultural differences that separated him from the others, differences that went beyond language. One afternoon, after a game, Jack invited Luca to join him and the other boys at a local diner for lunch. The diner was lively, filled with kids from the neighborhood. The boys excitedly ordered burgers, fries, and sodas. When the waitress turned to Luca, he hesitated, realizing he wasn't familiar with the items on the menu. His English lessons hadn't included the names of foods he'd never eaten before. Embarrassed, he pointed at Jack's choice and gave a nod, hoping his selection would be acceptable. As he waited for his meal, Luca noticed the other boys laughing and chatting with ease, throwing around slang and jokes he didn't understand. He tried to follow along, picking up a word here and there, but the speed and informal tone made it nearly impossible. The conversation seemed to flow in a rhythm he couldn't keep up with, and he felt himself drifting back into that familiar place of feeling like an outsider. When their food arrived, Luca took his first bite of an American burger. The taste was different from anything he was used to back in Italy. It was heavier, saltier, and he found himself unsure if he liked it. He missed the lighter meals from home, the familiar flavors that brought comfort. As he watched the others devour their meals, he felt a pang of homesickness, a reminder that he was far from everything he knew. Jack noticed Luca's discomfort and leaned over, giving him an encouraging smile. "Good, right?" he asked, his tone friendly. Luca nodded, trying to appear enthusiastic, but his half-hearted response didn't go unnoticed. Jack didn't press further, sensing that Luca was missing home. Instead, he quietly offered some of his fries, which Luca accepted gratefully. It was a small gesture, but it reassured Luca that he wasn't completely alone in this unfamiliar place. As they walked home, Luca reflected on the subtle but undeniable differences that made him feel out of place. It wasn't just the language, it was the way the boys interacted, the foods they enjoyed, the slang they used. He wondered if he would ever fully adapt or if he would always feel a step behind. But despite these doubts, he reminded himself that Jack and the other boys had accepted him, even with his awkward English and unfamiliarity with their culture. That evening, he spoke to Aunt Maria about his homesickness, admitting his struggle to fit in completely. She listened patiently, comforting him with a reminder that everyone experiences cultural differences in a new place, even if they don't talk about it. She shared her own stories of adjusting to America and encouraged Luca to be patient with himself. Feeling reassured, Luca went to bed that night with a renewed determination to embrace the differences, even if they made him uncomfortable. He understood that this experience was about more than learning a language. It was about learning to adapt, to grow, and to find his place in a new world, even if that place looked different from what he'd imagined. The next day, at the park, Luca felt the lingering effects of his homesickness, but decided to focus on the positive. His time with Jack and the boys had taught him that friendships could be formed despite differences, and he was determined to build on that foundation. During the game, however, a new challenge arose. One of the boys, a kid named Ryan, had a habit of teasing the others, including Luca. Most of the time, the boys laughed it off, seeing it as harmless fun, but today Ryan directed his jokes at Luca's English. When Luca struggled with a phrase, Ryan exaggerated his pronunciation mockingly, drawing laughter from a few of the other boys. Luca's face burned with embarrassment. He knew Ryan's words were meant to be playful, but they stung. The laughter reminded him of all the times he'd felt inadequate, of the barriers he'd struggled to overcome since he arrived. He glanced at Jack, hoping for some support, but Jack seemed hesitant, caught between his loyalty to Luca and the casual humor of the group. Unable to hold back his frustration, Luca muttered, "Not funny," and turned away, feeling a mix of hurt and anger. The boys fell silent, sensing the tension. Jack quickly stepped in, giving Ryan a light shove. "Come on, man," he said, his tone firm. "Luca's doing his best." Jack's words were simple, but they were enough to break the tension. Ryan mumbled an apology, though Luca could tell it was more out of obligation than sincerity. Despite Jack's defense, Luca felt a wall rise between him and the group. For the first time, he wondered if he truly belonged or if he was simply tolerated. He stayed quiet for the rest of the game, focusing on his movements and trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in his chest. Jack noticed Luca's silence and tried to lighten the mood, offering him encouraging words and a pat on the back whenever he made a good play. After the game, as the boys began to disperse, Jack walked over to Luca, a look of genuine concern on his face. "Hey, I'm sorry about Ryan. He can be a jerk sometimes," he said, his voice soft. Luca nodded, appreciating Jack's support but still feeling the sting of Ryan's teasing. It was a reminder that, no matter how hard he tried, there would always be people who saw him as different. Jack seemed to sense Luca's lingering doubt and put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't let it get to you. You're one of us, Luca. We want you here," he said, his words full of sincerity. Luca looked at Jack, feeling a rush of gratitude for his friend's loyalty. He realized that Jack's friendship was more important than any teasing or jokes from the others. Jack had defended him, standing up when it mattered, and that meant more than any fleeting moment of embarrassment. As he walked home, Luca felt a renewed sense of belonging. He might face challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, but he knew that Jack's friendship was real, a steady presence in his new life. His resolve to learn English grew stronger, fueled by the knowledge that he had a friend who believed in him, even when others didn't. That night, Luca opened his notebook, going over the phrases he'd struggled with earlier. He repeated them quietly, determined to turn today's painful experience into motivation. He knew he couldn't control what others thought of him, but he could control his own growth. And with Jack by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following day, Luca returned to the park with a new determination. The previous day's teasing from Ryan had stung, but the support he'd received from Jack lingered even more powerfully. Luca wanted to show Jack that he wasn't discouraged, that he would keep learning and improving, not just for himself, but to honor their friendship. When he arrived, the group was already warming up, but he noticed Jack breaking off from the others and coming over to greet him. "Hey, Luca," Jack said, his voice warm. Ready to play, Luca nodded enthusiastically, his confidence bolstered by Jack's familiar grin. Throughout the game, Luca found himself focusing more intently, recalling phrases he had practiced and pushing himself to communicate more. At one point he called out, "I got it," as he caught a ball heading his way. The boys cheered, and Jack gave him a thumbs up, the simple gesture lifting Luca's spirits. It was the kind of encouragement that he'd come to rely on, each small moment reminding him of how far he'd come. After the game, Jack sat with Luca on the bleachers, pulling out a small notebook. "Thought I'd bring this," Jack said, showing Luca a few English phrases he'd written down with their meanings. "You've been working hard, so I thought we could add some new words to your list." Luca's face lit up with excitement. He felt grateful for Jack's thoughtfulness, as it showed just how much Jack valued their friendship. As they went over each phrase, Luca repeated the words with determination, carefully committing them to memory. Jack's patience and encouragement gave Luca the confidence to push past his insecurities, and he realized he was starting to feel more comfortable speaking English. With each phrase they practiced, Luca felt a little closer to understanding the language and culture of his friends. It was still challenging, but he was beginning to see that learning wasn't just about memorizing words, it was about connecting with people and understanding their world. He felt lucky to have a friend like Jack, someone who not only encouraged him, but also took the time to help him grow. That evening, as Luca walked home, he replayed the day's conversations in his mind, savoring each moment of progress. He felt a sense of pride and gratitude that motivated him to keep learning. As he reviewed his new phrases before bed, he couldn't help but smile, thinking of Jack's patient explanations and the way his friend believed in him. Luca realized that he wasn't just learning English. He was building a bridge to new experiences and connections he hadn't thought possible. As the summer days continued, Luca's confidence grew with each interaction. He found himself speaking up more often, using the phrases Jack had taught him, and even attempting to join in on jokes and casual conversations. Though he still stumbled over words and felt nervous, the laughter and smiles from his friends helped him feel like he was truly part of the group. One afternoon, while waiting for the others to arrive at the park, Jack and Luca sat on the grass, talking about their favorite games and foods. Jack did his best to speak slowly, allowing Luca to understand as much as possible. Luca shared stories from Italy, using his limited English to describe his home, his family, and the games he played as a child. To his surprise, Jack listened intently, asking questions and laughing along as Luca recounted some funny moments from his hometown. Though his English was far from perfect, Luca felt that he was able to convey his stories and make Jack laugh, which filled him with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt before. When the other boys arrived, Jack encouraged Luca to share one of his stories with the group. Luca hesitated, feeling a surge of nerves, but Jack's supportive smile reassured him. Taking a deep breath, Luca began to tell a simple story about his favorite holiday in Italy. His words were broken and sometimes awkward, but he noticed the boys listening, their expressions open and encouraging. As he finished, the group burst into applause, laughing and cheering him on. "That was great, Luca," one of the boys said, giving him a high five. Jack grinned, clearly proud of his friend's progress. For the first time, Luca felt like he truly belonged. His voice, though imperfect, was being heard. He realized that his friends appreciated his effort, not just his ability to speak fluently. It was a powerful moment of acceptance, one that marked a turning point in his journey. By the end of the day, Luca felt a new sense of freedom. He understood now that making mistakes was part of the process, and that his friends respected his courage to try, regardless of the outcome. Jack's unwavering support had helped him reach this point, and Luca was determined to keep pushing forward, to continue discovering his voice in this new language. That night he lay awake, reflecting on the day's events and feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the experiences he'd had. The journey wasn't easy, but each step brought him closer to understanding not only English, but also the world around him. Luca knew he still had much to learn, but for the first time he felt ready to face each challenge with a newfound confidence. Luca's excitement grew as Jack invited him to join the neighborhood kids at the annual summer fair that weekend. The fair was a highly anticipated event, filled with games, rides, and food stalls that brought people from all around town. Luca couldn't wait to experience it, though he felt a familiar pang of nervousness at the thought of navigating everything in English. When they arrived, Luca's eyes widened at the sights and sounds. Brightly colored tents lined the grounds, music played from every corner, and laughter filled the air. He looked around, feeling both thrilled and overwhelmed. Jack patted him on the back, grinning. "Let's go get tickets," he said, pointing toward a nearby booth. Luca followed Jack, observing how his friend handled buying tickets. He paid attention to the short exchange with the ticket seller, noting how Jack asked for specific amounts and handled the local currency. When his turn came, Luca nervously approached the booth, his mind racing as he tried to remember the words Jack had used. "2 tickets, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The ticket seller smiled, handing him his tickets. Relieved, Luca glanced back at Jack, who gave him a thumbs up. This small victory gave Luca a burst of confidence, and he felt ready to try more interactions on his own as they explored the fair. They made their way to the game stalls, where Jack eagerly led Luca to the ring toss game. Luca watched as his friend skillfully threw the rings, cheering him on with newfound enthusiasm. When Jack won a small stuffed animal, he handed it to Luca as a keepsake. "For good luck," he said with a grin. Luca accepted it, touched by the gesture, and tucked it under his arm as they continued exploring. As they wandered through the fair, Luca noticed a booth selling cotton candy. He'd seen it before but had never tried it. Curious, he pointed to the booth and asked, What is this?" Jack laughed. "It's cotton candy. Want to try it?" Luca nodded, intrigued. Jack handed him $1 and encouraged him to order it himself. Taking a deep breath, Luca stepped up to the booth. "1 cotton candy, please," he said, hoping he'd said it correctly. The vendor handed him a fluffy pink clod on a stick, and Luca's eyes lit up as he took his first bite. The sweetness melted in his mouth, and he laughed, delighted by the strange but delicious treat. Jack chuckled beside him, enjoying Luca's reaction. The day continued with rides, games, and laughter, each new experience adding to Luca's growing sense of confidence. He realized he was beginning to enjoy himself without constantly worrying about the language barrier. His friends' support and encouragement had allowed him to feel at ease, and he felt grateful for every moment they spent together. As the sun began to set, the boys made their way to a large grassy area where families had gathered to watch the evening fireworks. Luca settled down on the grass beside Jack, clutching the stuffed animal he'd won earlier. The sky grew darker, and the first fireworks shot up, exploding into a shower of color that lit up the night. Luca watched in awe, his heart swelling with a mixture of happiness and gratitude. This summer had turned into something he never expected, a journey of growth, friendship, and self-discovery. He glanced at Jack, who gave him a friendly nudge as if sensing Luca's emotions. In that moment, Luca realized that he didn't need to fully understand every word or custom to feel connected. He had found a place here with friends who accepted him for who he was. As the fireworks lit up the sky, he felt a deep sense of belonging, a feeling that he would carry with him long after the summer ended. The morning after the fair, Luca still felt a warm glow from the experiences he'd shared with his friends. He'd made memories he would cherish, and his confidence had grown significantly. But just as he began to feel at ease in this new world, a setback reminded him of the challenges he still faced. During an afternoon game at the park, one of the older boys joined them. He was a friend of Ryan's, known for being particularly good at baseball and for having a sharp tongue. Luca had seen him around before, but had never played with him. When the game began, the older boy quickly noticed Luca's mistakes and occasional hesitations in English. He began to make pointed comments, questioning Luca's place on the team. "Why is he even here if he doesn't understand half of what we're saying?" the boy muttered loudly enough for Luca to hear. The words hit hard, and Luca's confidence began to waver. His mind raced with self-doubt, each mistake he made reinforcing the feeling that he didn't belong. Jack tried to defend him, insisting that Luca was doing his best, but the comments continued. Luca's spirit sank, and he felt a familiar wave of embarrassment wash over him. He wanted to leave, to escape the harsh words and find solace in the quiet of his room. For the first time in weeks, he felt that he didn't belong, that perhaps he was just a burden to his friends. After the game, Luca walked home alone, his heart heavy with doubt. He replayed the older boy's words in his mind, each one chipping away at the confidence he had built. All the progress he'd made felt small in comparison to the overwhelming sense of inadequacy he now felt. He wondered if he would ever truly fit in or if he was destined to always be on the outside. When he arrived home, Aunt Maria noticed his quiet demeanor and asked if he was all right. Luca hesitated, then shared his feelings with her, explaining how the comments had hurt him. She listened attentively, offering words of comfort and reminding him of the strength he had shown since arriving in America. She encouraged him to focus on the positive moments he'd shared with his friends rather than the hurtful words of one person. That night, Luca lay awake, thinking about the support his aunt and Jack had given him. He knew they believed in him, even if he sometimes struggled to believe in himself. Slowly, he began to remember the successes he'd had, the moments when he'd felt accepted and valued. He realized that while the road might be difficult, he had come too far to let a few harsh words hold him back. As he closed his eyes, Luca made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't let this setback define him. Tomorrow, he would return to the park, stand alongside his friends, and face whatever challenges came his way. He understood that growth wasn't always easy, but he was determined to continue no matter how many obstacles he faced. The next morning, Luca woke up with a lingering sense of doubt, but he reminded himself of the promise he'd made the night before. He wouldn't let one negative experience define his summer. With a deep breath, he got ready and headed to the park, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. When he arrived, Jack was already there, tossing a baseball into his glove. He looked up, a grin spreading across his face. He spotted Luca. "Hey, ready to play?" Luca gave a small nod, but his hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Jack's smile faded slightly, and he motioned for Luca to sit with him on a nearby bench. "What's wrong, Luca?" Jack asked, concern evident in his voice. Luca hesitated, struggling to find the words to explain how he felt. Finally, he managed, I don't belong here. I make too many mistakes." Jack listened quietly, his gaze steady and supportive. When Luca finished, Jack shook his head. "You're wrong, Luca. You do belong here, and you're doing great. We're all learning and making mistakes, even me." His words were simple, but they held a sincerity that touched Luca deeply. Jack continued, sharing stories of times he'd felt out of place or doubted himself. Luca listened, surprised to hear that his friend, who always seemed so confident, had faced similar struggles. Jack's stories reminded Luca that everyone had moments of insecurity, and that these moments didn't have to define him. Encouraged by Jack's words, Luca felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His friend's support renewed his determination, and he realized that he didn't need to be perfect to be part of the group. He just needed to keep trying, to keep learning, and to believe in himself as much as Jack believed in him. When the other boys arrived, Luca joined the game with a newfound confidence. He made mistakes, But instead of letting them shake him, he laughed along with his friends, seeing each moment as part of his journey. Jack's encouragement echoed in his mind, steadying him whenever he felt uncertain. By the end of the game, Luka felt a sense of accomplishment, not because he'd played perfectly, but because he'd persevered. As they left the park, Jack walked beside him, and Luka couldn't help but feel grateful for his friend's loyalty and understanding. With Jack's support, he knew he could face whatever challenges came his way. In the days that followed, Luka focused on pushing past his insecurities. Each morning, he reviewed his notebook of English phrases, repeating them until they felt natural. Aunt Maria noticed his renewed dedication and offered to help him practice, engaging him in simple conversations and encouraging him to speak with confidence. At the park, Luka made a point to join in on conversations, even if he didn't fully understand every word. He knew that the only way to improve was to keep trying, and his friends responded with patience and support. Jack continued to be his biggest encourager, always there with a reassuring smile or a friendly nudge whenever Luka stumbled over a phrase. One afternoon, as the boys sat in the shade after a game, Ryan asked Luka about his life in Italy. Luka hesitated, surprised by the question, but pleased to share. Using the phrases he'd practiced, he described his hometown, his family, and the small traditions he missed. The boys listened with interest, asking questions and laughing along as he shared stories of his family's Sunday dinners and his friends back home. As he spoke, Luka felt a growing sense of pride. He was able to convey pieces of his life, to share who he was, even in a language that wasn't his own. It was a small triumph, but it held immense meaning for him. For the first time, he felt that his voice was being heard, that his experiences mattered. That evening, as he walked home with Jack, Luka thanked him for always supporting him. Jack shrugged, grinning, "You're my friend, Luka. We're all just glad you're here." As the days turned into weeks, Luka continued to push through his challenges, each small victory building his confidence. He learned to laugh at his mistakes, to see them as part of his journey rather than failures. His friends' support allowed him to grow, and he realized that he was no longer the outsider he'd once felt himself to be. One day, while practicing with Aunt Maria, Luka was surprised to find that he could understand most of what she was saying. The words that had once felt foreign now felt familiar, like pieces of a puzzle he was finally beginning to solve. He beamed with pride, realizing just how far he had come since the start of the summer. That night, he looked out his bedroom window, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. His journey had been filled with challenges, but each one had brought him closer to understanding not only English, but himself. Luka knew he still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next. With a renewed sense of purpose, Luka closed his notebook knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to grow. He was no longer just a boy struggling to fit in. He was a part of something larger, a friend, a learner, and, in his own way, a storyteller. The summer might be ending, but his journey was only beginning. As the summer days dwindled, Jack and the boys organized a farewell party for Luca. It was a surprise event, a way for them to show their appreciation for the friend they'd grown close to over the past few months. Jack invited everyone to the park, where they set up blankets, brought snacks, and prepared games, creating a festive atmosphere under the shade of the tall trees. When Luca arrived, he was taken aback by the sight. He hadn't expected a party and felt a mixture of joy and bittersweet emotion. He realized just how much he'd come to care for his friends. Jack approached him with a grin, holding out a small paper crown he'd made. "For the guest of honor," he said, placing it on Luca's head. As the boys cheered, Luca felt his heart swell with gratitude. He looked around at the friends who had made him feel at home in a place that had once felt so foreign. He knew that this was a memory he would carry with him forever. The group spent the afternoon playing games, sharing stories, and laughing together. Luca found himself speaking more freely than ever before, the language that had once seemed like a barrier now feeling like a bridge. He joined in on jokes, shared stories of Italy, and even attempted a few English puns, which were met with encouraging laughs and groans from his friends. As the sun began to set, Jack handed Luca a small notebook. "We all wrote something for you," he explained, his tone sincere. Luca opened the notebook, flipping through the pages to find handwritten messages from each of his friends. Some were simple farewells, others shared memories of games and laughs, but each message touched Luca's heart. Moved by their words, Luca took a deep breath and looked around. He wanted to express his gratitude, to tell them how much their friendship meant to him. Gathering his courage, he stood up, holding the notebook close. "Thank you, all of you," he began, his voice steady. "This summer, it was hard at first, but you made it special. I'll never forget you." His friends clapped and cheered, some of them playfully pretending to wipe away tears. Luca felt a sense of pride and belonging that he hadn't thought possible just a few months ago. He realized that the language he'd struggled to learn was no longer an obstacle, but a tool that had allowed him to share his feelings with people who had become like family. As they wrapped up the evening, Jack walked with Luca to the edge of the park, the quiet settling around them. "I'm going to miss you, Luca," Jack said, his voice soft. Luca nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "Me too. But I'll come back one day, I promise." They exchanged a final hug, and Luca knew that this wasn't truly a goodbye. He had built something lasting here, something that distance couldn't erase. With a wave, he turned and headed home, clutching the notebook tightly, his heart full. The day of Luca's departure arrived too quickly. He woke up early, taking one last look around his room, his belongings packed and ready by the door, Aunt Maria came in, giving him a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you, Luca. You've come a long way," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Luca nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. As they drove to the airport, Luca gazed out the window, taking in the familiar streets, parks, and houses that had become a part of his summer memories. He realized just how much he'd changed since he first arrived. He was no longer the shy boy who barely understood English. He was someone who had grown, who had learned, and who had found a place for himself in a new world. When they reached the airport, Jack was waiting to see him off. They shared one last hug, a silent promise of friendship lingering between them. "Remember," Jack said with a grin, "keep practicing your English, and I'll keep practicing my Italian." Luca laughed, nodding. Teal, with one last wave, he headed toward the boarding gate, holding on to the memories they'd made and the words they'd shared. As the plane took off, Luca looked out the window, feeling a bittersweet mixture of excitement and longing. He was heading back to Italy, but he knew that he would return one day. The friends he'd made, the lessons he'd learned, they were now a part of him. When he arrived home, his family welcomed him with open arms, thrilled to have him back. But Luca felt a subtle shift within himself. He was no longer just the boy who had left. He was someone who had grown, who had learned to navigate a new language and a new culture, who had faced challenges and come out stronger. That evening he sat by his bedroom window, looking out at the familiar streets of his hometown. He opened the notebook his friends had given him, reading through their messages once more, each one bringing a smile to his face. He knew that his journey with English was far from over. It was only the beginning. With a newfound sense of confidence, Luca picked up his own notebook, flipping to a blank page. He began writing a letter to Jack, his words flowing more naturally than ever before. He wrote about his flight, his family, and how much he missed their games at the park. As he wrote, he realized that he was no longer afraid of making mistakes. His journey had taught him that growth wasn't about perfection. It was about perseverance, friendship, and embracing the unknown. As he finished the letter, he looked out at the night sky, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the summer that had changed him. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it with an open heart and an open mind. And so, with a quiet sense of determination, Luca closed his notebook, knowing that this was only the beginning of his story.